Welcome back to Teach Me the Bible Stories with Miss Michelle. Today we'll return to the book of Exodus and look at Exodus chapters 9 through the middle of chapter 12, where we will see the last 5 plagues for a total of 10 plagues. Now we will also see God proves to be the most powerful God. There will be 10 questions at the end. You can earn 100 points. But first, those books of the Bible. There's 5 books of law: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. 12 books of history: Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. 5 books of wisdom: Job. Now I want to teach you the second book of wisdom, which is Psalms. Now for the book of Psalms, we're using the ASL sign for poetry. Now it looks like you're taking something out of your heart and releasing it to the world. Now the reason why we're using the ASL sign for poetry is because a psalm is a poem. And the book of Psalms is a collection of 150 psalms or poems. And these are prayers to be prayed and songs to be sung and laments to be expressed. We will learn more about the book of Psalms in our next video. For now, are you ready for today's story? Listen carefully. This story is from the Bible, God's holy word. Now, in our last lesson in the book of Exodus, we learned the first 5 plagues. The plague of blood, the plague of frogs, the plague of flies, the plague of gnats, and the plague of livestock. And those 5 plagues or disasters came because Pharaoh refused to listen to the Lord God. God had said, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" Pharaoh refused to listen. God had said that the Israelites were to go on a 3-day trip into the desert wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord their God. But Pharaoh refused to let the Hebrew slaves stop their work and go on that trip. Okay, what were the first 5 plagues? Blood, frogs, flies, gnats, and livestock. Well, even after that plague of livestock, where all the livestock of the Egyptians died, but the livestock of the Israelites lived, even after that, Pharaoh refused to let the people go. Then the Lord told Moses to toss soot from a furnace up into the air. And when he did that, all the people and animals in the land of Egypt broke out in painful boils. Boils covered everyone's skin. And even Pharaoh's magicians who were there, they broke out in painful boils. In fact, it was so painful they fell to the ground because it was too painful to stand. But the Lord God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen. So the 6th plague was the plague of boils. Okay, what was the 6th plague? Boils. Well, days later, the Lord told Moses to go to Pharaoh early in the morning and give this message from God. "Let my people go, or I will send the full force of my plagues against you, and you will know there is no one like me in all the earth. Tomorrow I will send the worst hailstorm that Egypt has ever had." Well, Moses stretched out his hand towards the sky. Then lightning and hail came down over all of Egypt. Hail struck everything not under a cover. Men and animals were killed by the falling hail. The only place that it didn't hail was in Goshen, where the Israelites lived. Pharaoh then told Moses and Aaron, "This time I've sinned. The Lord is right and I and my people are wrong. Pray to the Lord to stop the hail and I will let you go." Moses said he would pray, but he knew that Pharaoh still didn't fear the Lord God. Well, Moses was right. When Pharaoh saw that the hail stopped, he changed his mind and he would not let them go. Okay, so what was the 7th plague? Hail. It hailed in all of Egypt except for where? In Goshen, where the Israelites lived. And Pharaoh said he sinned, and he said he would let the Israelites go. But what happened after the hail stopped? He changed his mind, and he would not let them go. Okay, can you tell me what the 6th and 7th plague are now? Boils and hail. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may do these miraculous signs among them, and you will know that I am the Lord." Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, and they told him that unless he lets God's people go, a plague of locusts would come and cover the whole surface of the land, and no one would even be able to see the land because there would be so many locusts. The locusts would eat all the plants and crops and go into all the houses. And Moses and Aaron then left. But Pharaoh's officials, they begged Pharaoh to just let the Hebrew slaves go because they did not want this plague of locusts to come. So Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron back, and he told them he would let the men go, but only the men. The women and the children could not go. But Moses and Aaron said, "No, we can't do that because God has commanded for all the Israelites to go." So when Pharaoh would not let all the Israelites go, then the plague of locusts came. And the locusts came and they ate everything. It was black in Egypt because there were so many locusts. Well, after the locusts came into Pharaoh's home and they were everywhere, finally, Pharaoh calls back Moses and Aaron and he says, "I have sinned against the Lord and against you. Please forgive my sin once more and ask the Lord to stop the locusts." Well, Moses prayed to the Lord, and the Lord changed the direction of the wind and carried off all the locusts into the Red Sea. But then the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the Israelites go. Okay, Pharaoh said only a certain group of people could go. Who did Pharaoh say could go? Only the men. And why did Moses and Aaron not agree with that? Because God said for everyone to go, for all the Israelites to go. That means the women and children needed to go too. Because Pharaoh wouldn't agree to let everyone go, the 8th plague came. What was the 8th plague? Locust. Okay, can you now say what the 6th, 7th, and 8th plague are? The boils, hail, and locust. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand towards heaven, and then there will be thick darkness to cover the whole land of Egypt. Darkness so dark that it will be felt." So Moses stretched out his arm towards heaven, and that darkness covered the land of Egypt. It was so dark that no one could see anything, and it was completely dark for 3 days. For 3 days, no one could see another person. No one could see anything. So everyone just sat there in place. They didn't move because it was so scary. But there was light in Goshen where the Israelites lived. So Pharaoh told Moses, "Okay, go worship the Lord, even your women and your children. But your sheep and your cows must be left behind." Well, Moses said, "We have to take our sheep and cows so that we can sacrifice to the Lord our God." Well, this frustrated Pharaoh, and he would not let them go. But before Moses left, he warned Pharaoh about the final plague. Moses told Pharaoh that God would come one night very soon at midnight, and every firstborn male in the land of Egypt would die. Moses warned Pharaoh that even his firstborn son would die. Okay, so the 9th plague was the plague of darkness. And the final plague would be the plague of the firstborn. Okay, so what was the 9th plague? Darkness. And how many days was it completely dark? 3 days. Then Pharaoh said that all the Israelites could go, but what could not go? Their sheep and cows. And why wouldn't Moses and Aaron agree to that? Because they needed to sacrifice those sheep and cows to the Lord. And what would be the final plague? The plague of the firstborn. Moses warned Pharaoh that who would die in his home and in every home in Egypt? His firstborn son and every firstborn son in Egypt. So, can you tell me now the last 5 plagues, beginning with boils? Can you tell me those? Boils, hail, locust, darkness, and firstborn. Well, then the Lord gave Moses and Aaron instructions to prepare for Passover, the night when all the firstborn sons would be killed. The Lord said that on the 10th of the month, each Israelite family should get an unblemished, perfect sheep or goat and keep it in their home for 4 days. Then, as it begins to get dark at twilight on the 14th day of the month, that sheep or goat must be killed. And then blood from that animal should be put on the door frames of the houses. The meat of that animal should be roasted on the fire and eaten that night with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Each Israelite family should eat quickly and be dressed with sandals on and ready to go. Okay, so what were the instructions to the Israelites to prepare for Passover? What kind of sheep or goat were they to keep in their home like a pet for 4 days? An unblemished, perfect sheep or goat. Now, unblemished means that it wasn't hurt or sick or had something wrong with it. So if that's too hard of a word, unblemished, just remember a perfect sheep or goat. Okay, on the 14th day, what was supposed to be put on the door frames of each Israelite home? Blood from that animal. Well, then the Lord explained that he would pass through the land of Egypt that night and strike every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, both people and animals. The Lord said, I am the Lord, and I will execute judgment on the gods of Egypt. The Lord said that when he sees the blood on the door frames, he will pass over so that no one will die in that home. The Lord told the Israelites that after they moved to the land of Canaan that the Lord had promised to give them, they were to continue to celebrate Passover every year so that they could remember how the Lord passed over their homes and saved them. Okay, the Lord explained that he would pass through the land of Egypt and strike what in the land of Egypt? Every firstborn male, both people and animals. Then the Lord said, I am the Lord. I will execute judgment on the what? The gods of Egypt. The Lord said that when he sees the blood on the door frames, he will do what? He will pass over. So there would be no death in that home. Did you notice how Pharaoh confessed his sins a couple of times and acted like he was ready to turn from his sin? But then as soon as the plague ended, Pharaoh went right back to where he was before. Well, you know, sometimes people act that way today. When they have problems, they call out to the Lord and say they're ready to live their lives for the Lord. But as soon as their problems end, they return right back to their sin. Well, you know what? The Lord God sees what's in our hearts. He knows if we really want to live our lives for him or if we just want our problems to end. So don't be like Pharaoh. Really commit yourselves fully to the Lord. Surrender your lives to him. Well, before the final plague, the Lord said, I am the Lord, and I will execute judgment on the gods of Egypt. Well, he certainly did that. You see, Pharaoh and the Egyptian worship many nature gods. For example, they worshiped the god of the Nile. The Nile River provided greatly for the people in Egypt. But instead of thanking the Lord God, the creator of the universe who created the Nile River, they made up an imaginary god, a false god, and they worshiped him. Well, when the first plague came and the Nile River turned to blood, it showed the people in Egypt that the one true God, the creator of the universe, he was the one with the authority over the Nile River. In fact, all the plagues showed that God is the one with the authority and power. Well, the second plague was frogs. The Egyptians were not allowed to kill frogs as a sign of respect for their frog-headed goddess of birth. So they had this goddess, a female god, that had a frog head. And because of that, they were not allowed to kill frogs. So God was making a clear point with the plague of frogs that he was the one with the power over frogs. And then all those frogs died and had to be swept up into countless heaps. Now, one more example. The Egyptians worshiped the sun. And in the 9th plague, it turned completely dark for 3 days. Once again, God was proving that he was the one with authority over all nature, even the sun. The 10 plagues show that the false gods of Egypt were just that, false. There is only one true God. Now, in the first 5 plagues, the Bible tells us that Pharaoh hardened his heart. Now, we've already learned that our hearts are hardened because of sin's deception, when we believe the lie that we don't need to obey the Lord. Well, that's what Pharaoh did. Before the plagues began, Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" But in the last 5 plagues, the Bible tells us that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. In Exodus 10, right before the plague of locusts, God tells Moses why he was hardening Pharaoh's heart. God said, "So that you may tell your children and grandchildren how severely I dealt with the Egyptians and performed miraculous signs among them, and you will know that I am the Lord." You see, God wanted the Israelites to remember how powerful their God was. The 10 plagues proved that there was no one like the one true God of Israel. He is all-powerful, and he can do anything, and he always keeps his promises. Okay, are you ready for your 10 questions? Just hit the pause button if you need a little bit more time after each question. Question 1. After the 6th plague of boils came the 7th plague of hail. It hailed in all of Egypt except for where? Where was there no hail? Time in Goshen, where the Israelites lived. Now, if you didn't remember Goshen, you just said where the Israelites lived. That's okay. You can still get points. Number 2, Pharaoh only wanted the men to go. Because Pharaoh wouldn't agree to let everyone go, the 8th plague came, which caused all the plants and crops to be eaten up. What was the 8th plague that came after boils and hail? What was the 8th plague? Time locust. Number 3, the 9th plague was darkness. How many days was it completely dark? Time 3. Number 4, then Pharaoh said that all the Israelites could go, but what could not go? Time, their sheep and cows. Number 5, why wouldn't Moses and Aaron agree to that? Why did they insist that the sheep and cows had to go? Time, because they needed the sheep and cows to sacrifice to God. Number 6, the final plague was the plague of the firstborn. Moses warned Pharaoh that who would die in his home and every home in Egypt? Time, Pharaoh's firstborn son and every firstborn son in Egypt. Number 7, what were God's instructions to the Israelites to prepare for Passover? What kind of sheep or goat were they to keep in their home like a pet for 4 days? Time an unblemished, perfect sheep or goat. Now, if you just said perfect, that's good enough. A perfect sheep or goat. Number 8, on the 14th day, what was to be put on the door frames of the Israelite homes? What were they to put on their door frames? Time, blood from that animal, from that perfect animal. Number 9, the Lord explained that he would pass through the land of Egypt and strike every firstborn male in the land of Egypt. Then the Lord said, I am the Lord, and I will execute judgment on the what? Time on the gods of Egypt. Number 10, the Lord said that when he sees the blood on the door frames, he will do what? Remember? He will pass over. He will pass over so that no one would die in that home. Okay, I have a bonus question today. Can you tell me what the last 5 plagues are? I'll give you the 6th plague, the boils. So now you just have to tell me 4 more. So boils, time. Okay, boils, hail, locust, darkness, and firstborn. If you got that, you can get an extra 10 points. Okay, how many did you get right? Now multiply that by 10 and that's your score. I have 2 assignments for you. I want you to go read Exodus chapter 9 through the middle of chapter 12, actually 12 verse 28. And then I want you to tell someone what you learned. Come back for our next video in our Teach Me the Bible Story series. See you next time.